Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Aneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The intra-Afghan negotiations between Kabul and the Taliban have begun in Qatar's capital city of Doha. All stakeholders addressed the opening ceremony. Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation head Abdullah Abdullah said Kabul seeks humanitarian ceasefire to be announced soon. Taliban leader Mullah Baradar Khan said a future Afghanistan should have an Islamic system. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said after Afghanistan, Pakistan suffered the most due to war, and now all must be aware of the peace spoilers. United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington hopes all sides will enjoy cooperation with its neighbors. The Iranian army says it has intercepted 3 intruding US spy aircraft during the ongoing naval and air exercises. In a statement, Iran's military said the drones left the air defense zone after the locally manufactured Karar drone was launched. Tehran is holding military exercises near the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz and the Sea of Oman. Palestine has recalled its ambassador to Bahrain shortly after Manama signed an agreement to restore ties with Israel. Palestinian National Authority's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki summoned the envoy to discuss the aftermath of the deal. Earlier, Israel and Bahrain agreed to establish full diplomatic relations in a second breakthrough between Tel Aviv and its Arab neighbors. India has recorded the world's highest daily jump of over 97,000 coronavirus cases and more than 1,200 fatalities overnight. The country's infections have crossed 4.65 million mark, with the death toll reaching 77,472. Meanwhile, Pakistan's COVID-19 death rate continues to decline as 3 people died in the past 24 hours, taking the toll to 6,373. The coronavirus has claimed more than 915,000 lives and infected over 28.4 million people across the globe. Peru's Congress has approved a motion to begin impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra. 65 lawmakers voted to impeach Vizcarra, who is charged with moral incapacity over leaked audio tapes and alleged ties to a singer involved in a fraud case. Vizcarra has vowed to fight the charges as the legislature is due to debate and vote on the motion next week. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The intra-Afghan negotiations between Kabul and the Taliban have begun in Qatar's capital city of Doha. What all stakeholders had to see the peace in Afghanistan had to say today in this report.
The intra-Afghan talks are a ray of hope to finally bring an end to the nearly 2 decades of conflict that has caused tens of thousands of casualties. The negotiations have begun only after months of delay over the precondition of prisoners' release. In Doha today, Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation head Abdullah Abdullah opened the session with his speech.
I am very proud that on behalf of Afghanistan, for opening the peace negotiations, I am here. For a very important and historical ceremony. I welcome you all, and also on behalf of the President of Afghanistan, I am talking here and I pass his regards to you all.
The Taliban say they fulfilled their commitments under the Doha deal signed with the U.S. and expect other parties to follow suit. Mullah Baradar Khan, who is leading the Taliban team, said a future Afghanistan should have an Islamic system.
and also in this ceremony, I request and I hope that both sides pay attention to the provisions of holy religion of Islam, and for getting to this very important purpose, we should pay attention to the benefits of all, not to the benefits of just some people.
Pakistan has played a key role in the peace process for the neighboring country. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said after Afghanistan, Pakistan suffered the most due to the war. He said all must be aware of the peace spoilers at this important junction.
Spoilers from within and from without will pose formidable challenges. Constant vigilance will be required to guard against their machinations. We hope all sides will honor their respective commitments and remain unflinchingly committed to achieving a positive outcome.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has expressed hope that all sides enjoy cooperation with neighbors.
You will write the next chapter in Afghan history. We hope this chapter is one of reconciliation and progress, not another chronicle of tears and bloodshed. We urge you to make decisions that move away from the violence and the corruption and towards peace and development and prosperity.
The talks are aimed at finding a political settlement in Afghanistan that not only will sustain the peace in the country, but will also accomplish cooperation and connectivity in the region.
Now, for more on this, we are joined by Pakistan's former Foreign Minister, Mr. Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri, I beg your pardon, from Lahore now. Sir, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has asked the Doha meeting to identify the peace spoilers. So, do you think this junction will be successful in pointing out such elements and take countermeasures?
Basically, the first point is whether there's going to be a ceasefire. Now, ceasefire is very important, and the issue here will be the Taliban would want something in return, but without a ceasefire, frankly, there will be little international support. So in due course, there will be ceasefire. I don't think it will come in a hurry. All of us will be delighted, particularly Pakistanis. Pakistan has paid a very big price indeed for what has happened in Afghanistan in the last 4 decades. But this will have to be negotiated because Taliban feel that if once there is a ceasefire, it would not be easy for them to ask their fighters to go back to fighting if the talks fail to deliver results. So, it's not simply a question of stopping to fight, which on the face of it looks very easy. But since we have experience in the past, for example, last year, I think on the occasion of the Eid, there was a ceasefire and there were great signs, joyful signs, Taliban soldiers and ordinary Afghans embracing each other. Now that's a threat to the Taliban leadership, because once you get a feeling that there is peace, the Taliban fighters may feel that it's not worth carrying on this fight. So although on the face of it looks very easy, why don't they have a ceasefire? There will be a ceasefire, but I think it will come after some negotiations and agreements on certain issues.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri, Pakistan's former foreign minister, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We have also been joined by defense analyst, Major General retired Ijaz Awad from Islamabad. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. The intra-Afghan talks between Kabul and the Taliban have started in Doha today. What do you expect from these talks?
The fact is that this dialogue has entered into a very important, decisive, but yet a very critical phase. Because this is the first time, previously the agreement was made between the US government and the Taliban. And now it is the Afghan government which is first time interacting with the Taliban for the restoration of peace in Afghanistan. And these are the two parties which really matter, because America is in any case going to withdraw sooner or later. And these are the two parties who have to make an arrangement. So intra-Afghan dialogue is very decisive. Now we have to see how this progresses. But then there are some difficulties in this process which must be overcome. First and foremost is there is a trust deficit between the two parties. And unless that trust deficit is removed, unless they start trusting each other, till that time they'll not be able to make a progress. So the process would be slow. We should not expect miracles overnight, but then it is attainable and doable. So trust deficit must be overcome. Then there is a reconciliation council which is headed by Abdullah, and there are differences between Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani. So the government of Afghanistan has to present a united front to ensure that whatever is agreed between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan, that is acceptable to the both parties, that is Abdullah, Ashraf Ghani, the government is going to comply with all those arrangements that are being made between the two parties.
Right. We have also seen India has been trying to sabotage the peace process aimed at ending the protracted conflict in Afghanistan. So, addressing the opening ceremony of the intra-Afghan talks, Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar focused on anti-India activities in Afghanistan, ignoring the regional peace. So, what's your take on this?
Well, India would try to sabotage the process, and there are other parties within that who would try to sabotage the process but more important is the intra-Afghan reconciliation, because people of Afghanistan not only deserve peace, they want peace. They have seen war for too long, for about 2 decades they have suffered, and now they are all seeking peace and stability. So Indian government has no access to the Taliban, but they have been in communication for the last 19 years with the government of Afghanistan. And that's why I said, if Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani can put up a united front and can assure the Taliban that they are going to implement and they are serious for restoration of peace, in that case, a spoiler like India will not be able to do much.
Absolutely. We hope to see peace in Afghanistan. Major General retired Ijaz Zaman, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Now, moving on with the news stories, the major world organizations and blocs are calling for a humanitarian resolution of the Afghan war. This comes as the intra-Afghan negotiations between Kabul and the Taliban began in Qatar's capital city of Doha. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for redoubling efforts to safeguard Afghan civilians. Elsewhere, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has also called for an immediate end to violence in Afghanistan. NATO Secretary General said Afghan peace talks are the best chance for peace and the world should embrace them wholeheartedly. He said Afghanistan is no longer a safe haven for international terrorists. Meanwhile, European Union has urged all parties to agree to an unconditional ceasefire in Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has discussed the regional security situation with US CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth F. McKenzie. Now, the military's media wing said the two officials discussed the Afghan peace process and the ongoing situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Both Pakistan and the US have welcomed the decision by the Afghan warring parties for talks aimed at establishing peace in the region. Moving on, Palestine has recalled its ambassador to Bahrain shortly after Manama signed an agreement to restore ties with Israel. The Palestinian Liberation Organization has slammed the deal, saying it was another treacherous stab to the Palestinian cause. Palestinian National Authority's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki has summoned the envoy to discuss the aftermath of the deal. Earlier, Israel and Bahrain agreed to establish full diplomatic relations in a second breakthrough between Tel Aviv and its Arab neighbors. In a joint statement, the United States, Bahrain and Israel said the agreement is historic to further peace in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump said Bahrain will join the two countries for a signing ceremony at the White House on the 15th of September. Both the UAE and Egypt were quick to congratulate Bahrain and Israel on their decision, while Hamas has condemned and rejected the US brokered agreement. In a statement, Hamas spokesman Azim Qasim said Bahrain has sided with the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian cause. He termed the deal as a political crime and a major failure to understand Israel's threats in the region. Now, the United Nations says Israel has razed 389 Palestinian-owned houses in the occupied West Bank from March to August, the highest average in the last 4 years. In a statement, the UN humanitarian office said the destruction left 442 Palestinians homeless. It said this huge displacement of people further exposed them to risks associated with COVID-19 pandemic. UN official Jamie McGoldrick said the destruction of property in an occupied territory is prohibited under international law. The Israeli authorities routinely raze homes of the Palestinians on their own lands in annexed East Jerusalem or the West Bank. Now, moving on, the Iranian army says it has intercepted 3 intruding US spy aircrafts during the ongoing naval and air exercises. In a statement, Iran's military said the drones left the air defense zone after the locally manufactured Qarar was launched. It said the drones were given multiple warnings before they were chased away by Qarar aircraft. Tehran is holding military exercises near the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz and the Sea of Oman. Iran says 3-day-long drills called Zulfikar 99 aim to prepare the military to defend the country's territorial waters. Now, Turkey says 3 of its soldiers have been killed and another wounded during an operation in the country's east. In a statement, the Interior Ministry said a Gendarmerie captain and 2 special sergeants were killed in Katak districts of Van province. The ministry said the terror group PKK remains active in the region. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the death of some 40,000 people during a 30-year conflict. Meanwhile, Peru's Congress has voted to open impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra for moral incapability. 65 members of Peru's 130-member Congress voted in favor of the move with 36 votes against and 24 abstentions. The Congress is due to debate and vote on the motion in the next week, with 87 votes required to remove Vizcarra from office. Lawmakers allege President tried to obstruct an investigation into nearly $50,000 in government contracts handed to a little-known singer. They say the leaked private recording suggests Vizcarra was attempting to downplay his meetings with the singer. The president has vowed to fight the charges, saying the move is a plot to destabilize the government.
I'm not going to resign. The presidency is a responsibility that I assumed with the Peruvian people, and I'm a person who keeps his word. I'm not going to resign, and I ask the Congress of the Republic to analyze the situation with caution and responsibility. You take the decision that you think best, but I'm not going to resign.
Well, in September last year, Vizcarra also faced a previous attempt to impeach him for incapacity. Now, moving on, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged Conservative MPs to back his plan to override part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. The European Union has warned the UK it can face legal action if it does not ditch controversial elements of the internal market bill. In an online video call with around 250 Parliament members, Johnson said the Conservatives must not return to miserable squabbling over Europe. A Tory MP proposed an amendment to the bill which will affect trade between Britain and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, the European Parliament has threatened to drain any of the trade deal if the bill becomes the UK law. The next official round of talks, the 9th since March, will start in Brussels on the 28th of September. Now, 50 people have died when an artisanal gold mine collapsed in the Democratic Republic of Congo's southern Kivu province. A local mining NGO said the site near Kamituga caved in following heavy rains in the region. The NGO said the young miners were in the tunnel as the mine caved in, trapping the victims inside. Mining accidents are common in the unregulated mines in Congo, where miners have to work without proper equipment. Meanwhile, India has recorded the world's highest daily jump of over 97,000 coronavirus cases and more than 1,200 fatalities overnight. The country's infections have crossed 4.65 million mark, with the death toll reaching 77,472. The virus has claimed more than 915,000 lives and infected over 28.4 million people across the globe. Details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has re-emerged in parts of the world, straining governments and their efforts to contain the disease. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban says his government is drafting a war plan to counter the second wave of the pandemic. England's case count is doubling every 7 to 8 days as the government reminded public to play their role to keep the virus at bay. France has ruled out imposing a new lockdown to contain the resurgence, but said will implement a raft of less radical measures.
In the face of this epidemic, our strategy is not changing. Fighting against the virus while avoiding to have to put on hold our social, cultural and economic lives, the education of our children and our capability to live normally.
Canada has reported 0 COVID-19 deaths in the past 24 hours for the first time since March 15th. In Latin America, the confirmed coronavirus death toll in Mexico has surpassed 70,000 after the government reported 534 new deaths overnight. Meanwhile, the Brazilian state of Bahia has signed an agreement to conduct phase 3 clinical trials of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine.
The government of Bahia signed a memorandum of understanding with the Russian government, with the Russian company responsible for the development of Sputnik V vaccine, and we signed a confidentiality agreement to have access to sensitive information about the development of this vaccine.
COVID-19 deaths in Australia reached 803, but new daily infections in the country's largest hotspot of Victoria continued to fall. South Korea's new cases stayed below 200 for the 10th day in a row, but health authorities remain wary about no let-ups in sporadic cluster infections.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 3 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, bringing the country's death toll to 6,307. The Health Ministry says 584 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the country has 6,046 active cases, while total reaches almost 301,000. The ministry said over 288,000 people have recovered so far. Sindh remains the most affected province with over 131,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 97,000 cases so far. Balochistan has over 13,000 reported cases, while the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province has over 36,000 infections. Pakistan's southwestern province of Balochistan, opulent in oil, gas and minerals, stipulate the country with an exclusive economic zone. Balochistan coast extends over 750 kilometers from the hub to Gwadar, giving the region an extensive strategic rank along with an international level of port activity. More in this special report by our correspondent Sumaira Khan from Gwadar.
Sandy beaches and rocky shores along the Makran coast have stimulated attraction for tourists worldwide. The new highways, augmented telecommunication, an international port and improved security milieu boosted the urbanization in the region, particularly in Gwadar.
In terms of the contact between the people of Gwadar and other parts of the world, in terms of exchange of knowledge, the knowledge and information that the people of this area have got and the knowledge of and information that the other parts of the globe have. This is the time for exchange of that information in a highly secure environment.
Ongoing development of Makran coastal area through fisheries, tourism, trade and social growth projects supervised by both government and army is proving to be a catalyst for entire Balochistan.
This is the place from where the benefits of economy, the benefits of maritime connectivity, the benefits of regional connectivity by exploiting its resources, by engaging its youth in different kinds of jobs and industrial base is going to give a lot of boost to the region and to the world.
Makran Coastal Highway and M8 under China-Pakistan Economic Corridor have made a huge impact on the economy and socio-politics of southern Balochistan. They have boosted the local businesses of fisheries and tourism as well. While looking at the advanced levels being added to this ancient profession of boat making here at Gwadar Boat Basin, it can be easily visualized that Pakistan is entering its present while having an eye on future but keeping its past intact. It's not only establishing an international level of port authority, but it is also nurturing its ancient skills and its fishermen here. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Gwadar City.
Now moving on, the US and the European Union say they are determined to imposing sanctions on Belarusian officials responsible for election fraud and a crackdown on the protesters. Speaking to media, US Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun said Washington is coordinating curbs with the EU. He also urged Russia to push President Alexander Lukashenko to step down and give way to the will of his people. Meanwhile, in a statement, EU's Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell said the bloc is determined to impose curbs on Belarusians responsible for election fraud. The diplomat said the European Union will take further restrictive measures if needed. He said Brussels deplores the increase in violence and forced exile of opposition members. Borrell said this shows Minsk's increasingly open disregard for the rule of law. Meanwhile, Russia has condemned the extension of sanctions by the European Union, saying the bloc has missed an opportunity to normalize ties. In a press conference, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Brussels continues its accusatory rhetoric instead of trying to look for common ground. The spokesperson also slammed the new US sanctions on 3 Russians over allegations of interfering in the election campaign. Zakharova said such actions will not give the result Washington is looking for. Earlier, the European Union officially extended its sanctions on the Russian finance, energy and defense sectors for another 6 months. The measures include travel restrictions and freezing of assets targeting 175 people and 44 entities. Now going on to Mali, where experts appointed by the military leaders have proposed a 2-year transitional government led by a president chosen by the army. In an 8-page charter, the constitutional experts wrote a 24-month transitional period was needed in light of the gravity of the crisis. They recommended the soldiers behind the coup choose the interim president and vice president and propose the prime minister. Under the proposal, the president will be a civil or military personality. This emerged on the second day of talks in Bamako, aimed at mapping a way forward in the wake of the August 18th coup. But the West African regional bloc has given the military until Tuesday to name a transitional president and prime minister. Now moving on to the US, where dozens of people are missing in Oregon wildfires that have displaced tens of thousands of people. The death toll from the western fires that began in August has reached to 25, with 5 losing their living in Oregon in a week. Wind-driven blazes have scorched the west coast states of Oregon, Washington and California. Oregon Governor Kate Brown says over 500,000 people are under one of the 3 evacuation alert levels. Brown said about 40,000 have already been ordered to leave. Oregon's Forestry Department Fire Protection says firefighters are still battling 16 large blazes. More than 68,000 people are under evacuation orders in California, where the largest fire in the state history has burned over 3 million acres this year. Now, Greek authorities, with the help of aid agencies, have prepared to shelter migrants in hundreds of temporary tents. This comes after around 13,000 migrants were left homeless from a fire in their camp on Lesbos Island earlier this week. The tents flown in by helicopters have been set up by the country's military. In a statement, refugee agency UNHCR said it has been highlighting the need to address the situation and conditions for refugees on the Aegean island. The European Union and Greek officials said a new facility will be built on Moria with higher standards. The migrants, most from Africa, Syria or Afghanistan, have been living on the streets for 3 days without any shelter. Earlier, they also staged a protest over the poor living conditions. The first batch of the Sputnik 5 vaccine against the coronavirus has been shipped to the regions of Russia. Russia's healthcare ministry said it will ensure distribution and organization of vaccination of citizens from high-risk group. It said the ministry will also ensure the logistics chains for delivering the vaccine to the constituent entities of the Russian Federation. Earlier this week, Russia's healthcare minister Mikhail Murashko announced phase 3 of the clinical trials of the Sputnik 5 vaccine. Russia becomes the first country to register the vaccine against the coronavirus on August 11th. Now, the United States budget deficit has hit a record high of over $3 trillion. In a report, the U.S. Treasury Department said the federal government spent over $6 trillion in the first 11 months of the financial year. The Treasury Department said the government spent $2 trillion on the coronavirus relief efforts. Government data shows the shortfall is more than double from the previous full-year record set in 2009 in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. The agency said the total U.S. debt was expected to exceed $26 trillion. Earlier, the Congressional Budget Office said the economy was likely to run a full-year deficit of $3.3 trillion. And now it's time for the weather updates. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.